Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about eating disorders, so this is a trigger warning now if you think this isn't going to help you. Not everyone is able to talk about their eating disorder without having it flare up, so please click away if you don't want to talk about it. I wanted to talk about this because it's something that I have a lot of experience with, and I've noticed over the course of many years knowing a lot of trans people that I know more people who are trans with eating disorders than I do without. In fact, it's very hard for me to think of a trans person I know that has not at one point in their life struggled with an eating disorder. And I think that's because of two things. One, body dysmorphia and being transgender go hand in hand, and body dysmorphia is a key aspect in an eating disorder. And two, I think it's because a lot of trans people are so desperate to feel control over their body that an eating disorder is one way to do it. Because let's face it, HRT and transition is not as fast as people would want it to be. It's just not. Like, by the time you start your transition, you are a lot more ready for the changes and to live your new life than your body is. Your body's going to take time, whereas you don't want to take time. You have taken all this time to finally come to terms with it and finally do something about it, so you're going to be more ready. So a lot of trans women specifically turn towards an eating disorder because that kind of control and fast, and oftentimes fast results, makes them feel like they are getting closer to their goal every day. I think a lot of trans women can relate to the idea that thin and feminine are similar qualities. Like, society tells women you have to be tiny, you have to not eat anything, but you also have to be curvy, and it's this impossible standard, especially for trans women, because a lot of us were depressed people before we transitioned, so a lot of us were overweight or did carry extra weight. So transitioning, part of that journey is also us trying to come into our own, and almost all of us fluctuate in our weight over the course of our transition. When I first started, I've talked about this many times, but I got really deep in my anorexia, which was something I struggled with my whole life. But it got so bad, and I wasn't able to recognize that that was happening because I thought that all these changes that were happening to my body were as a result of my HRT, but in reality, my eating disorder was preventing my body from being able to process my medication. So there's a whole list of reasons why I want to talk about eating disorders for trans people, but the first one I want to emphasize is estrogen, especially for male to female transition, does not work properly if you are not properly if you're not getting the proper nutrients for your body. Estrogen binds to the fat in your body, and if you're like I was when you started your transition, it's possible that you have very little fat to begin with. So if you have very little fat, you start this medication that needs you to have fat, and then you get really deep in your eating disorder, you might be shooting yourself in the foot and unable to process your estrogen without even knowing it. For years, my doctors were baffled at the low levels of estrogen in my body, and looking at it now, looking back, I realize it was because of my eating disorder. A lot of trans people I know, not only do they eat a very small amount, some of them eat exclusively like nutrient supplements like Soylent or Huel or other types of nutrients that are supposed to be marketed at people who are trying to lose weight. But if there's one thing I could impassionately plea, is that all trans women put their weight loss on hold if they are just starting their transition. I understand you want to be thin. I understand that society tells you if you're not thin, you're not worth anything. But you will not be able to physically transition if you are amidst an eating disorder. And I've been 7 years on HRT, and I only in the past few years realized how much more was ahead of me once I started taking care of my body instead of worrying about it. Another thing I want to talk about is oral estrogen. I talked about this in one of my other videos, but oral estrogen can be tricky, especially if you are an older person. Older people tend to not get prescribed oral estrogen because it can be bad for your cholesterol. But as a young person who went on HRT, I was prescribed it, and I was super excited because I didn't want to give myself any shots. But it was amidst my eating disorder, and I learned after the fact that if you take oral estrogen but you're not properly eating, if you're taking it on an empty stomach, you will not actually metabolize the pills. You will pee them out. You will pee them out. And that is exactly what I did. So if you are on oral estrogen specifically, it is time for you to analyze, am I eating properly? Am I taking care of my body? Or am I riding the high of an eating disorder? Because what a lot of people don't acknowledge is that when you are anorexic or you have another eating disorder, a lot of times it's a way to feel in control. There is a kind of euphoria experienced by the anorexic person when they choose to not eat. It makes you feel in control. You get a little bit of a high almost. It's a type of self-harm. And if you do not acknowledge that most trans people in their life are going to experience an eating disorder, and this is not just me pulling this out of my ass. It is statistically significant. And the body dysmorphia that leads to an eating disorder is something that virtually every trans person experiences. And I just think it's really important to talk about it because I'm still dealing with my food anxiety. You know, I'm trying to force myself to eat in the morning. That's one of my biggest problems is in the morning I don't want to have food, so I end up going throughout the day without eating. And I take pills, I take medication. You cannot do that if you are on medication because you won't be able to give your body the chance to metabolize it. The older I get, the more I realize that these self-destructive behaviors that I have, they're not a make or break, you do this once you die, you know, but they're going to actively impact the health of my life as I move on and as I get older. And if I don't address it now, I could live with this problem my whole life. And I don't want to deal with health complications. There are a lot of health complications that can come from transitioning, and that is because it's a lot to put your body through. It's on top of all the other things that happen when you transition. I did a video on this. A person cannot change physically, mentally, socially, sexually, all at the same time without really having it affect their mental health. So you need to take care of yourself. And if there's one thing I could say to another trans person who's watching this who maybe hasn't eaten yet today, you know, start small. Get like some bread, put some peanut butter on it. Just have something, you know. Baby steps are really important, and I cannot tell you the difference that I noticed in my transition once I stopped my anorexic tendencies and allowed my body to gain some weight, because you will gain weight. If your estrogen is not making you gain weight, then it's not working properly. And it needs fat to deposit. It needs to find fat in the body. Otherwise, you're just going to pee it out. And the results I have, I did not get them in the first 2 years, because in the first 2 years were largely inconsequential. Don't get me wrong, I was on testosterone blockers. I was still experiencing changes that made me really happy, but I don't believe that the estrogen was able to do everything it wanted to do, and that's because of my eating disorder. So please acknowledge how disordered eating can affect your transition, not only physically, but mentally too. It's not good for you. Even if you're riding that high, ooh, I'm in control, and the thinner I got, the more feminine I become. You know, I've always been really tall, and I was always pretty thin, and so I felt I was always going to tower over everyone. I wasn't going to have womanly curves, so the only control I had on how feminine I felt, was makeup, jewelry, my hair, the length of my hair, and how thin I was. I thought the thinner I got, the more feminine I would seem, and it was almost like a drug, you know? It was addictive to feeling. It was addictive to feel thin and feel small, you know? When I was younger, I was quite short, and I really liked it, and I hit a growth spurt when I was 13, and I grew like a full foot over the course of one summer. And I remember coming back to school, and suddenly I was towering over everyone, and I was so upset, and I was so self-conscious. And that was actually when I became a vegetarian. And looking back, I was like, oh, I want to eat healthy. I want to do all this. I want to help animals. I want to help the environment. But in reality, I was using my vegetarianness as an excuse to start my disordered eating. I've always been very picky. And with each restriction I put on my diet, it allowed me to be more picky and eat less. It got so bad that once I eventually started living an authentic gay life, it was right around the time that I was told by a doctor that they thought I might have a sensitivity to gluten and dairy. So I wasn't eating meat, I wasn't eating gluten, and I wasn't eating dairy. So you know what I was eating? Nothing. And that, now, looking back, was really, really bad for me. I dealt with fatigue, I dealt with depression, I dealt with insomnia, and I think that all of those things were not helped by my inability to eat. And a person who is undergoing a physical transition, their body needs nutrients to change. It needs nutrients to develop and grow. And since transitioning, I transitioned and I am almost 6 feet tall. And when I first started hormone replacement therapy, I was 108 pounds. And I am now over 150 pounds. And I think I look great, I feel great, but all that fat, that was what my body wanted to have, but it couldn't because of my eating disorder. And I do not think I look fat despite gaining over 40 pounds. I do not feel fat. In fact, a lot of the fat that I did accumulate went to the areas I love, like here and here and here. And the gender euphoria I feel these days is unrivaled. I never was able to feel that gender euphoria before. And that's not just because of my eating disorder, but the eating disorder wasn't helping. And just because I was really skinny did not mean I felt like a woman either. I did kind of feel like a skeletal alien. You know, they say that when you're visibly queer, people treat you not like a man, not like a woman. They kind of treat you like a third gender thing. I felt like a thing. I felt like an it. I felt like an alien creature. And I think I used my eating disorder as an excuse to continue in those feelings. So if there's one thing I could say, it's that you are a product of your environment. As a trans person, you've probably always been treated like an other, like an outsider, like an it by some people. And you have to understand, no matter how smart you are, in tune you are with your feelings, you're going to internalize that somehow. I always thought, well, I'm too smart to care what people think. I don't care about the haters. I'm doing me. I love me. But I didn't realize that years of that did eventually internalize in my mental state, you know? I talked about this in another video, but there was a point when I felt a lot of shame about the life I lived on the internet, and I almost deleted my whole social media, my YouTube channel, everything. And looking back, I do not know what there is to be ashamed of. You should not let people tell you how to feel about yourself, but that's what I was doing. I was letting me think, oh, this is cringe, I was cringe. I wanted to hide my male life and my younger life because I thought the only way I would be taken seriously as a trans woman is if I just acted like a cis woman. And that's what a lot of trans women do once they're post-transition, you know? It's hard to be visibly trans. It's hard to be trans. And some people don't want to make that their whole life. So once they can pass, which I can now, for a long time they try to spend their life passing and not being treated as trans anymore, but being treated as cis. And let me tell you, I know what it's like to be treated as cis now, and it is so much easier. But now it's Transgender Awareness Week, and I'm realizing how much representation mattered to me, how much it mattered to me to see a trans person online, see what was possible. I didn't even know what trans was, you know, but I knew I wanted something. I knew I needed something, and if it weren't for the transgender visibility that I was able to have when I was younger, I would not be the happy woman I am today. So I decided to come back to the internet partially because I don't want anybody else to feel the way I did. I don't want anybody else to want to go into hiding because it's easier. It is. But you know, just because it's easy doesn't mean it'll make you happy. Because you're always going to have that internalized transphobia. You're going to be treated as a woman once you pass, but you won't be treated as a woman by everyone. There are some people who, no matter how pretty you look, no matter how well you've worked on your voice or how well you dress, they will be able to tell. And not everyone will. Or there will be kids that go up to you and be like, why do you have a boy's voice? And you just have to realize that that is part of the trans experience. You are never going to be 100% comfortable. You're just not. And I am getting more comfortable every day. But I'm no longer telling myself the lie that it's all going to go away someday. Because if it did go away, then then that would mean that we're not living in a transphobic world, and we are. The only difference is once you become less visibly trans, people start to become less abusive, you know? But as soon as you try to be more visible, more proud, more out, there will be an army of people who are totally healthy and totally not crazed, who spend all their time telling trans women on the internet to kill themselves, which is definitely a normal and well-adjusted thing to do. And, you know, you have to accept the truth of that. You know, you have to accept that reality. I'm fine to be part of these people's kink, you know? But it would be nice if they paid me. I don't mean to ramble, but I know one too many trans women who are not only dealing with all of this shit that comes with being trans, but they're also putting their body through a lot of strain because all they're eating every day is like a nutrient supplement milkshake and maybe some like candy. And you know, there was a time in my life where I lived off of potato chips and Starburst, and not very much, but that's not good for you, and I don't want people to think that's normal, because there is the large community online that fosters eating disorders, you know? Like, I've been trying to grow on Tumblr, and I've been trying to follow people and talk to people more, and I realized somehow I found myself in eating disorder Tumblr, which is a whole community of people talking about their eating disorders. Like, I followed someone immediately, they messaged me, do you have an eating disorder? And it's like, okay, that's a lot. Like, I do, in fact. I have anorexia, and I still struggle with that to this day, but that doesn't help, you know? And I get that these people want a community, but some of these eating disorder blogs are just people being like, not eating every day until I feel more like a woman, you know, or stuff like that. And I think it's damaging because there's so little trans representation to begin with on the internet, let alone healthy trans representation, you know? I mean, most people, the only trans person they know is like Caitlyn Jenner. And do I really need to say it, you know? And so when a young trans girl, for instance, goes on the internet and they see the only trans women on there are either like doing pornographic things, which I do not judge at all. Do what you gotta do. But there tends to be a centralization of a certain type of content for trans people on the internet. And a 13-year-old trans girl sees either porn or eating disorder. And it does have an impact. It does. And it has an impact on how you see yourself, because if you've never been represented, if you've never felt represented, then you will latch onto the first piece of media that makes you feel represented. When I was younger, I had never felt represented by anyone on TV until I saw the character of Kurt in Glee. And I saw that and it blew my mind. And looking back, there are so few similarities I have with that character. But it was enough of similarities that I could see myself in him. And that was so profound that it allowed me to start asking myself the important and difficult questions, like, why do you see yourself in him? What do you want to do? Do you want to wear different things? Like, and that representation made such a huge difference. But if Kurt's character had been the exact same as he was, but he had been knee deep in an eating disorder like I was, that might have reinforced my eating disorder at a young age without me being fully aware of it. And it's important to realize that representation matters, trans visibility matters, because a lot of trans women are like me, and once they start to pass, they kind of disappear. And I did that, and I'm not ashamed of it because it's part of the trans experience, but I'm trying to unlearn the tendency to hide myself now that I'm transitioned, you know? I'm unlearning that because I want to make the world safer and better to be trans, and one of the only ways to do that is to be truthful and honest about the good and the bad. There's so much good, I've talked about it on my channel, but I want to talk about the real issues. And one of the biggest, most prevalent issues is anorexia and other eating disorders. And I hope that this video has been able to explain a little more why I feel so strongly about this. If you are amidst an eating disorder, please do not feel shame. So many people go through it, and it is one of the hardest things to shake. It really is. You know, we need food to live. Whether your eating disorder is binging and purging or being unable to eat, it is such an integral part of our lives that no wonder so many people have anxiety about it. And so much of the food we eat now doesn't make us feel good. Some of us are allergic, you know, and you just try to spend some time being in touch with your body, especially if you're undergoing a transition, because you will not be able to do it if you are not in touch with your body, you know? Ask your body, what does it need? What does it want? Does it need some sun today? Does it need some exercise today? If you stay in touch with your body, you will be happier. Even though I am still learning this to this day, I want to be part of a movement of change, because I would like to see less trans people online brag about their eating disorder. Not that I think anyone should be ashamed of it, but you have to understand that there's no way to make or create something without influencing someone, you know? Like my video on Dave Chappelle and his transphobia. I don't think he's going to go out there and beat up a trans person again, although many of his anecdotes did say that's what he did. But I do think that he's going to influence the people who watch him to feel less ashamed of their own transphobia and be more proud and maybe more ready to commit acts of transphobia. And I think the same is true of just an innocent tweet by a trans woman, like the feminine urge to not eat all day. That is relatable. It is so goddamn relatable. But it is also, in my opinion, damaging, because it spreads and normalizes the idea that this is a normal, healthy thing. And I do not want people to think that anorexia is healthy, because it's not. It will make you feel in control. You might get gender euphoria out of it. You might get like a mental high, but it is not lasting. And I do not want more people to degrade their mental health, because you are going to be rejected socially. You are going to be rejected by someone in your family. And that is so hard already. If you're not eating, you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to hit you a million times harder. And like I said, I'm going to keep saying it. 80% of trans people contemplate suicide, 40% attempt. Try to break that cycle. Don't underestimate how bad things can get for you just because they're good now, you know? I had about as good of a transition as you can. I'm not going to lie. I am so lucky. And I still hit a rock bottom depression for years. And so if I, a very lucky, privileged person, can have that negative of an impact, I can only imagine what it's like for somebody who's struggling to get by, who's rejected by their family, who gets fired from their job, who socially isolates themselves. And all of these things happen to trans people so often. We need to talk about it. We need to acknowledge the elephant in the room. So let's take some time today to try to make it a little safer to be trans. If you are struggling with an eating disorder and you want to post about it, maybe add in, like, hey, trigger warning, eating disorders. Maybe add in, I know this isn't helping me, but this is my experience. You know, I'm not telling you to hide it, because I think more people should talk about their eating disorders. They're so common. They're so unbelievably common. But as long as you're not glorifying it, because there is a difference between saying, guess who didn't eat today, bestie, and I didn't eat today, but I'm trying to be better. And I don't want to make people feel more ashamed of their eating disorder than they are, because I feel a lot of shame. I'm trying to unlearn shame. But I do want people to take it seriously. Don't take it as a joke. So if there's one thing I can leave you with, go out, try to make a difference today. This is Trans Awareness Week. Be aware of not only the trans people, but be aware of the trans experience. And I'm trying to do my part to make the trans experience a little bit better. And I hope that you can too.